What if I told you that a single moment of courage could unravel a mystery that had haunted a powerful man for over 2 decades? What if saving a stranger's life could reveal a truth so shocking that it would change 2 lives forever? This is the extraordinary story of Zara, a 17-year-old girl from the slums of Lagos, Nigeria, who had no idea that pulling a man from the wreckage of a burning car would lead to DNA test results that would leave an Arab billionaire executive completely speechless. But this isn't just a story about rescue. It's about identity, loss, and the incredible power of fate bringing together two souls who shared more than either could have ever imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching Nigerian sun had barely risen over the sprawling slums of Makoko when Zara Okafor began her daily ritual of survival. At 17, she possessed the weathered hands of someone twice her age and the determined spirit of someone who had learned early that the world owed her nothing. Her bare feet navigated the narrow wooden planks that served as pathways between the stilted shacks built precariously over the Lagos lagoon. The air was thick with humidity and the mixed scents of fish, diesel fuel, and human struggle. Zara's home, if it could be called that, was a single room constructed from corrugated metal sheets and salvaged wood. She shared this cramped space with her grandmother, Mama Aduni, the only family she had ever known. The old woman's cough had worsened overnight, a harsh sound that echoed through the thin walls and reminded Zara that time was running out. Medicine cost money they didn't. Heaven hope was a luxury neither could afford. "Zara, my child," Mama Aduni wheezed from her makeshift bed of old newspapers and torn fabric. "You don't have to do this today. Rest." But rest was not an option. Zara had already calculated the math of their survival. Without the money she earned from her dangerous job cleaning the hulls of fishing boats, they would have nothing to eat. Without food, her grandmother's condition would deteriorate faster. It was a cycle that trapped them both, but Zara refused to let despair win. She kissed her grandmother's fevered forehead and stepped back onto the floating walkway. The fishing boats bobbed in the murky water below, their owners already preparing for another day on the unforgiving Atlantic. Zara had been cleaning these boats since she was 12, diving beneath them to scrape off barnacles and seaweed for a few naira that barely covered their basic needs. The work was dangerous, sharp metal edges, strong currents, and the constant risk of being struck by a boat's propeller, but it was steady income in a place where steady income was rarer than clean water. As she made her way toward the docks, Zara's mind wandered to the recurring dream that had haunted her sleep for years. In it, she stood in a vast house with marble floors and golden fixtures, surrounded by people who looked like her, but lived in a world she couldn't comprehend. A man with kind eyes always appeared in these dreams, reaching out to her with arms that promised safety and belonging. She would wake up each morning feeling an inexplicable sense of loss, as if she had been torn away from something important. But dreams were dangerous in Makoko. They made you forget that survival required your full attention. The morning progressed with brutal efficiency. Zara plunged into the lagoon's contaminated water time and again, her lungs burning as she held her breath to scrape the boats clean. The boat owners paid her in crumpled bills and loose change, never bothering to learn her name. To them, she was just another desperate child, willing to risk her life for pennies. By midday, the sun had reached its merciless peak. Zara's dark skin glistened with a mixture of sweat and lagoon water as she pulled herself onto the last boat of the morning. Her arms ached and her fingers were raw from gripping barnacle-covered metal, but she had earned enough to buy rice and maybe some fish for dinner. It wasn't much, but it was survival. As she prepared to dive one final time, a commotion erupted from the main road that ran parallel to the waterfront. Car horns blared, people shouted, and the sound of screeching brakes cut through the usual urban chaos. Zara paused, water dripping from her hair, and looked toward the source of the disturbance. The main highway was notorious for accidents. Wealthy businessmen and politicians often sped through this area in their luxury vehicles, treating the slum dwellers as obstacles to navigate around rather than human beings. The irony wasn't lost on Zara. People like her cleaned up after the rich in more ways than one, but today felt different. The shouting wasn't the usual road rage or market dispute. There was genuine panic in the voices, the kind of fear that transcended social boundaries. Zara climbed out of the water and onto the dock, her bare feet slapping against the wet wood as she moved toward the road. What she saw made her blood run cold. A sleek black Mercedes-Benz had crashed through the flimsy metal guardrail and was teetering dangerously close to the lagoon's edge. The front of the car was crumpled against a concrete barrier, steam rising from the engine. But it was the smoke beginning to curl from under the hood that sent a chill down Zara's spine, smoke that suggested the car could burst into flames at any moment. A crowd had gathered, but they maintained a safe distance. Some took photos with their phones. Others watched with the morbid fascination that accompanies someone else's tragedy. A few shouted suggestions, but no one moved to help. Through the spider-webbed windshield, Zara could see a figure slumped over the steering wheel. The driver was unconscious, completely unaware that his expensive car had become a potential death trap. The smoke was getting thicker, and the smell of burning oil began to fill the air. "Someone call the fire department!" a woman in the crowd yelled. "They won't come here fast enough," another voice replied. "This is Makoko. We're on our own." Zara stood frozen for a moment, her mind processing what she was seeing. The man in the car was clearly wealthy. His vehicle alone was worth more than everyone in Makoko would earn in their lifetimes combined. He represented everything that had kept her trapped in poverty, everything that treated her neighborhood as disposable. But as she watched the smoke grow thicker and heard the ominous crackling sounds from the engine, none of that mattered. What mattered was that someone was about to die, and she was the only one close enough and brave enough to do something about it. The crowd continued to grow, but they remained spectators. Zara realized with crystal clarity that if she didn't act, no one would. The man in the Mercedes would burn to death while dozens of people watched and recorded it on their phones. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Zara, we may have nothing, but we still have our humanity. Never let the world's cruelty make you cruel." Without another thought, Zara sprinted toward the smoking car. Behind her, voices called out warnings and protests, but she didn't slow down. The heat from the engine grew more intense as she approached, and the smoke made her eyes water. The car's door was jammed, the metal twisted from the impact. She pressed her face against the driver's side window and got her first clear look at the man inside. He appeared to be in his 40s, with olive-toned skin and graying temples. His expensive suit was rumpled, and blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. But it was his face that stopped her cold. Something about his features seemed familiar, in a way that made her heart race. The smoke was getting thicker. Zara grabbed the door handle and pulled with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Panic started to set in as she realized the car could explode at any moment. She looked around frantically and spotted a loose piece of concrete from the broken "A guardrail! Get away from there!" Someone in the crowd shouted. "It's going to blow!" But Zara was already swinging the concrete chunk at the passenger side window. The glass shattered, sending sharp fragments flying. Without hesitation, she cleared away the remaining shards with her bare hands, ignoring the cuts that opened on her palms. The smoke was now pouring into the car through the broken window, and she could hear the unconscious man's labored breathing. She squeezed through the window, her slight frame allowing her to slip inside the smoke-filled interior. The heat was unbearable, and her lungs burned with each breath. The man was heavier than she had anticipated, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Somehow she managed to drag him through the window and onto the ground just as the first flames erupted from under the hood. The crowd, which had been content to watch from a distance, suddenly surged forward to help carry the unconscious man to safety. Moments later, the Mercedes exploded in a ball of fire that sent the crowd scrambling backward. The intense heat scorched Zara's face and arms, but she had gotten him out just in time. As she sat on the ground, coughing smoke from her lungs and feeling the sting of glass cuts on her hands, Zara looked down at the man she had saved. He was beginning to stir, his eyelids fluttering as consciousness slowly returned. When his eyes finally opened and met hers, something inexplicable passed between them. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they simply stared at each other. His expression shifted from confusion to something deeper, recognition perhaps, or maybe just gratitude. But Zara felt something else entirely. Looking into this stranger's eyes, she experienced the same sensation she had in her recurring dreams. The feeling of standing on the edge of a truth that could change everything. She had no idea that the man she had just saved was Rashid Al Mahmoud, one of the most powerful executives in the Middle East. She had no idea that he had been searching for someone for over 20 years. And she certainly had no idea that the DNA test he would insist on taking would reveal a connection between them that would leave him utterly speechless. All she knew was that she had saved a life, and somehow, in doing so, she had set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The ambulance sirens wailed through the congested streets of Lagos as Rashid Al Mahmoud drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the haze of his concussion, one image remained crystal clear, the face of the young girl who had risked her life to save his. Her dark eyes held a depth that seemed impossible for someone so young, and when their gazes had met in those crucial moments after the rescue, he had felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that defied logic. Now, as the paramedics worked to stabilize him in the back of the ambulance, Rashid's mind raced despite his physical weakness. For 23 years, he had carried a burden that no amount of wealth or success could heal. 23 years of searching, of hiring private investigators, of following leads that always ended in heartbreak. 23 years of wondering if his daughter was alive, and if she was, whether she would ever forgive him for failing to protect her. The story began in 1999, when Rashid was a young executive working to establish his family's business empire in West Africa. He had fallen deeply in love with Kemi Okafor, a brilliant Nigerian woman who worked as a translator for his company. Their love affair was passionate but complicated. Her family disapproved of the relationship, and his family, back in Dubai, was already arranging a marriage for him with a cousin to strengthen business ties. When Kemi became pregnant, they had planned to elope to Europe, away from both families' interference. But the night before their planned departure, armed robbers had attacked their safe house in Lagos. In the chaos and gunfire, Kemi had disappeared. When the smoke cleared, Rashid found blood on the floor and no trace of the woman he loved or the unborn child. The official investigation concluded that Kemi had been killed, though her body was never found. Devastated and under pressure from his family, Rashid had returned to Dubai, but he never stopped believing that somehow, somewhere, his daughter might have survived. He had spent millions funding search efforts, orphanages, and DNA databases across West Africa, hoping against hope that one day he would find her. The ambulance pulled into the emergency bay of Lagos University Teaching Hospital, and Rashid was quickly wheeled into the trauma unit. As the doctors worked to treat his injuries, a concussion, several broken ribs and lacerations from the glass, his mind kept returning to the girl who had saved him. Something about her features, the way she moved, even the way she had looked at him, triggered memories he had tried to bury. Dr. Folake Adebayo, the attending physician, was reviewing his x-rays when Rashid finally came fully conscious several hours later. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the confident demeanor of someone who had seen everything emergency medicine could offer. "Mr. Al-Mahmoud," she said, checking his chart, "you're very lucky to be alive. If that young girl hadn't pulled you from the car when she did, you would have died in the explosion." "The girl," Rashid said, his voice hoarse. "Where is she? I need to thank her." Dr. Adebayo's expression softened. "She brought you here in the ambulance, but she left before we could properly treat her own injuries. She had cuts on her hands from breaking your car window, and she was suffering from smoke inhalation, but she insisted she was fine." "What was her name?" "Zara," the doctor replied. "Zara Okafor. She lives in Makoko, according to the paramedics." The surname hit Rashid like a physical blow. Okafor. It couldn't be a coincidence. Nigeria had hundreds of ethnic groups and thousands of family names, but this was Kemi's surname. His heart began to race as possibilities flooded his mind. "Doctor," he said, struggling to sit up despite the pain in his ribs, "I need you to arrange something for me. It's going to sound strange, but I need a DNA test." Dr. Adebayo frowned. "A DNA test? Mr. Al-Mahmoud, you suffered a head injury. Perhaps you should rest before making any important decisions." "No," Rashid said firmly. "You don't understand. This girl, Zara, she might be—" He paused, afraid to voice the possibility aloud. "I think she might be my daughter." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Al-Mahmoud, I understand you're grateful to her for saving your life, but 23 years ago," Rashid interrupted, "I was in love with a woman named Kemi Okafor. She was pregnant with my child when she disappeared during an armed robbery. Everyone assumed she was dead, but her body was never found. This girl has her surname, and she's about the right age." Dr. Adebayo studied his face carefully. As a physician who had worked in Lagos for decades, she had seen her share of remarkable coincidences and unlikely reunions. "Even if what you're suggesting is possible," she said slowly, "we would need the girl's consent for any DNA testing." "Then help me find her," Rashid said. "Please." Meanwhile, across the city in Makoko, Zara sat beside her grandmother's bed, gently cleaning the cuts on her hands with water and torn cloth. The adrenaline from the rescue had worn off, leaving her emotionally and physically drained. But something else was bothering her, something about the man she had saved that she couldn't shake. "You're troubled, child," Mama Adoni observed, her voice weak but perceptive. "Tell me about this man you saved." Zara hesitated. How could she explain the strange sensation she had felt when their eyes met? How could she describe the way he had looked at her, as if he were seeing a ghost? "There was something familiar about him, Mama," she said finally. "When he looked at me, it was like he recognized me, but that's impossible. I've never seen him before in my life." Mama Aduni was quiet for a long moment. Then, with great effort, she reached under her thin mattress and pulled out a small, water-damaged photograph. "Zara," she said softly, "there are things about your past that I never told you, things I thought would only bring you pain." Zara's heart began to pound as she looked at the photograph. It showed a young woman with features remarkably similar to her own, standing next to a man in an expensive suit. The woman was obviously pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "Who are these people?" Zara whispered. "The woman is your mother, Kemi," Mama Aduni said, tears forming in her clouded eyes. "My daughter, and the man—" She paused, struggling with the weight of a secret she had carried for over 2 decades. "The man is your father." Zara stared at the photograph, her hands trembling. The man in the picture bore a striking resemblance to the person she had just saved from the burning car, though he was younger and his hair was completely black rather than streaked with grey. "I don't understand," Zara said. "You told me my parents died in an accident when I was a baby." "I lied," Mama Aduni admitted, her voice breaking. "Your mother came to me the night you were born, bleeding and terrified. There had been an attack," she said. "Men with guns had come for her and your father. She managed to escape, but she was badly injured. She lived just long enough to give birth to you and to make me promise to keep you safe." "And my father?" "She said he was a wealthy Arab businessman who had been forced to return to his country. She believed he thought both of you were dead. She made me swear never to look for him, never to tell anyone who you really were. She was afraid that the people who had attacked them might come for you too." Zara felt the world spinning around her. Everything she had believed about her identity, her origins, her place in the world, was a lie. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," Mama Aduni said, reaching out to touch Zara's face with a shaking hand, "if the man you saved today looks like the man in that photograph, then perhaps it's time for the truth to come out. Perhaps God has brought you together for a reason." As if summoned by their conversation, a black SUV pulled up outside their shack. Through the thin walls, they could hear expensive shoes walking on the wooden planks that served as their street. A moment later, someone knocked politely on their door. Zara opened it to find Dr. Adebayo standing there, along with a tall man in a suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable in the slum environment. "Miss Okafor," Dr. Adebayo said gently. "My name is Dr. Adebayo from Lagos University Teaching Hospital. I treated the man you saved today. He's asked me to find you because he has something very important to discuss with you." Zara's grip tightened on the photograph. "What kind of discussion?" The doctor glanced at the man in the suit, who stepped forward. "My name is Ibrahim Hassan," he said. "I work for Mr. Al-Mahmoud. He believes there might be a connection between you and him that goes beyond today's rescue." "What kind of connection?" Zara asked, though her heart was already racing with the possibility. "He'd like to propose a DNA test," Dr. Adebayo said carefully. "He thinks you might be his daughter." Behind Zara, Mama Aduni let out a soft gasp. Zara turned to look at her grandmother, then back at the doctor and the businessman. In her hand, the photograph of her parents seemed to burn like a piece of evidence that could change everything. "If I agree to this test," Zara said slowly, "and it proves what he thinks it proves, what happens then?" Dr. Adebayo and Ibrahim exchanged glances. "That," Dr. Adebayo said, "would be between you and Mr. Al-Mahmoud to decide." Zara looked back at her dying grandmother, then at the photo in her hands, then at the 2 people who had just turned her world upside down. 23 years of secrets were about to be revealed, and she had a choice to make that would determine the rest of her life. The question was she ready for the truth? The genetics laboratory at Lagos University Teaching Hospital was a world away from the floating slums of Makoko. As Zara sat in the sterile waiting room, she felt completely out of place among the pristine white walls and expensive medical equipment. Her simple cotton dress, hastily cleaned but still bearing faint smoke stains from the rescue, stood in stark contrast to the clinical environment around her. Dr. Sarah Ogundipe, the head of the genetics department, had agreed to perform the DNA analysis personally. She was a woman in her early 40s who had studied at Cambridge and returned to Nigeria to establish one of West Africa's most advanced genetic testing facilities. As she prepared the testing materials, she couldn't help but notice the tension radiating from both participants in this unusual case. Rashid Al-Mahmoud sat across the room from Zara, his injuries bandaged, but his eyes never leaving her face. Even in his hospital gown and with his graying hair disheveled, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and making decisions that affected thousands of employees. But now, faced with the possibility that his greatest dream might be about to come true, he looked as vulnerable as any parent hoping for good news about their child. "Before we begin," Dr. Ogundipe said, settling into her chair with the test kit, "I want both of you to understand what we're about to do and what the results might mean. DNA paternity testing is highly accurate, over 99.9% when there's a biological relationship and 100% when there isn't, but I need you both to be prepared for either outcome." Zara nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she watched the doctor prepare the cotton swabs. The photograph of her parents lay carefully folded. In her pocket, a tangible link to a past she was only beginning to understand. Mama Aduni had insisted on staying behind in Makoko, claiming she was too weak for the journey. But Zara suspected her grandmother simply couldn't bear to witness the moment when decades of carefully guarded secrets would finally be revealed. "Miss Okafor," Dr. Ogundipe said gently, "this is completely voluntary. If you have any doubts about proceeding, now is the time to say so." Zara looked across the room at Rashid. Since arriving at the hospital, he had been nothing but respectful, even deferential. He had arranged for the best medical care for her grandmother, had ensured that Zara's own injuries were properly treated, and had made it clear that regardless of the test results, he wanted to help her family in gratitude for saving his life. But there was something in his eyes, a desperate hope mixed with fear, that told her this meant far more to him than simple gratitude. "I want to know the truth," Zara said finally, "whatever it is." The sample collection process was simple but felt monumentally significant. A quick swab of the inside of each person's cheek, the samples carefully labeled and sealed. Dr. Ogundipe explained that the laboratory would compare 16 different genetic markers to determine biological relationship. The process would take 72 hours to complete. 72 hours, Rashid repeated, as if trying to comprehend the weight of those words. After 23 years of searching, the answer will come in 72 hours. As they prepared to leave the laboratory, Dr. Ogundipe pulled Zara aside. "Miss Okafor," she said quietly, "I've been running genetic tests for 15 years, and I've seen many families reunited and many hopes dashed. Regardless of what these results show, your life is about to change dramatically. Make sure you have support systems in place." The warning proved prophetic. Within hours of leaving the hospital, word had somehow leaked about the DNA test. Journalists began gathering outside the medical center, and social media buzzed with speculation about the slum girl who might be a billionaire's daughter. The story had all the elements that captured public imagination: wealth, mystery, dramatic rescue, and the possibility of a fairy tale ending. Rashid, experienced in managing media attention, immediately arranged for security to protect Zara's privacy. But he couldn't shield her from the sudden scrutiny of neighbors, community leaders, and opportunists who emerged from everywhere once rumors of her potential inheritance began to spread. "You need to be careful, child," warned Pastor Emmanuel, the elderly minister who had known Zara since childhood. He had come to Mama Aduni's bedside to offer his counsel. Money changes people, and the promise of money changes them even more. There will be those who claim they always knew your true parentage, who will suddenly remember details they never mentioned before. His words proved accurate almost immediately. By the second day, a parade of visitors had come to their shack in Makoko. Distant relatives Zara had never met suddenly appeared with stories of how they had always suspected she was different. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged her existence began treating her with an obsequious respect that made her skin crawl. Most disturbing were the marriage proposals. Within 24 hours of the news breaking, Zara had received 17 offers of marriage from men across Lagos, some delivered by their mothers, others accompanied by gifts and promises of immediate wedding ceremonies. The attention was overwhelming and frightening. "They don't see me," Zara confided to Mama Aduni on the second night after the test. "They see what they think I might become, what I might inherit." Mama Aduni's condition had worsened since the revelation of Zara's parentage, as if finally, telling the truth had released her from a burden she could no longer carry. "That's why your mother made me promise to keep the secret," she whispered. "She knew that people would see you as a prize to be won, rather than a child to be loved." Meanwhile, Rashid was dealing with his own complications. News of his potential daughter had reached Dubai, where his current wife, Layla, and their 2 teenage children were struggling to process the revelation. He had married Layla 8 years after Kemi's disappearance, a marriage arranged by his family that had eventually grown into genuine affection and partnership. But the existence of another child, a daughter who might inherit a significant portion of his business empire, complicated everything. His phone rang constantly with calls from relatives, business partners and lawyers, all offering advice about how to handle the situation. Some suggested that if the test proved positive, he should bring Zara to Dubai immediately and integrate her into the family business. Others warned that acknowledging her could create succession problems and recommended discreet financial support. "Instead, what does your heart tell you?" asked his longtime friend and business partner Omar al-Rashid during a video call from Dubai. "Forget the business implications. Forget the family politics. If this girl is truly your daughter, what do you want to do?" Rashid looked out the window of his hotel suite at the sprawling cityscape of Lagos. Somewhere in those millions of lights was a young woman who might carry his blood, who had grown up in poverty while he built an empire she knew nothing about. "I want to know her," he said quietly. "I want to understand who she is, not just give her money and walk away. If she's truly Kemi's daughter, then she's the last connection I have to the only woman I ever truly loved." On the morning of the 3rd day, Dr. Ogundipe called both parties to return to the laboratory. The test results were ready. Zara barely slept the night before, her dreams filled with images of the life she might be about to inherit and the life she might be about to lose. By dawn, she had made a decision that surprised even herself. "Whatever happens today," she told Mama Aduni as she prepared to leave for the hospital, "I want you to know that you will always be my real family. You raised me, you loved me, you sacrificed for me. No DNA test can change that." The old woman smiled through her pain. "And you, my child, will always be the greatest blessing of my life, no matter whose blood runs in your veins." At the laboratory, Rashid was already waiting when Zara arrived. He looked as if he hadn't slept either, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of stress and anticipation. Dr. Ogundipe greeted them both with professional composure, but Zara could see something in the doctor's expression, a weight that suggested the results were significant. "Before I share these results," Dr. Ogundipe said, settling behind her desk with a sealed envelope, "I want both of you to understand that whatever we learn today, it's just the beginning of a much longer journey. DNA can tell us about biological relationships, but it cannot tell us how to navigate the human relationships that follow." Rashid leaned forward in his chair. "Doctor, please, I've waited 23 years for this moment. Dr. Ogundipe nodded and carefully opened the envelope. She studied the results for a moment, her expression giving nothing away. Then she looked up at both of them, and Zara knew from the gravity in her eyes that their lives were about to change forever. "The results are conclusive," Dr. Ogundipe said slowly. "Mr. Al-Mahmoud, Miss Okafor is indeed your biological daughter. The probability of paternity is 99.97%. The silence that followed was deafening. Rashid's face went completely pale, and for a moment Zara thought he might faint. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and when he finally looked at her, his eyes were filled with tears he seemed unable to shed. "Zara," he whispered, and in that single word she heard 23 years of grief, hope, and overwhelming love, but the results had revealed more than just paternity. As Dr. Ogundipe continued to explain the genetic markers and what they indicated, she delivered news that left Rashid completely speechless. News that neither of them had been prepared for, and that would change everything they thought they knew about their story. Dr. Ogundipe's hands trembled slightly as she continued reading from the genetic analysis report, her professional composure beginning to crack under the weight of what she was about to reveal. Rashid sat frozen in his chair, still processing the confirmation that Zara was indeed his daughter, while Zara herself felt as if she were watching someone else's life unfold before her eyes. "There's something else," Dr. Ogundipe said, her voice taking on a tone that made both Rashid and Zara lean forward. "Something that appeared in the genetic markers that I've never encountered in 15 years of conducting these tests." "What do you mean?" Rashid asked, though his voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Ogundipe set down the first page of results and picked up a second document, her brow furrowed in concentration. "When we run paternity tests, we examine specific genetic markers that are inherited from both parents. What we found here is extraordinary." She paused, looking directly at Rashid. "Mr. Al-Mahmoud, according to these results, you're not just Zara's father. You're also genetically related to her through another family line." "I don't understand," Zara said, speaking for the first time since the initial results were announced. "The markers indicate that you share DNA that could only come from—" Dr. Ogundipe hesitated, clearly struggling with how to explain something that challenged biological norms. "From a sibling relationship between your parents." The room fell into absolute silence. Rashid's face went from pale to ashen, and his breathing became shallow and rapid. "That's impossible," he finally managed. "Kemi and we weren't related. I would have known." "I thought the same thing," Dr. Ogundipe said, pulling out a third document. "So I ran the test 3 more times, using different portions of the samples, and even brought in a colleague to verify the results independently. But the genetic evidence is undeniable." She looked at both of them gravely. "Somewhere in your family histories, there's a connection that neither of you knew about." Zara felt the room spinning around her. Not only had she just learned that the man she saved was her father, but now she was discovering that her parents had been unknowingly related. The implications were staggering and deeply disturbing. "How is that possible?" Rashid asked, his business-minded analytical nature trying to process information that seemed to defy logic. Dr. Ogundipe spread several family tree diagrams across her desk. "There are several scenarios that could explain this. The most likely is that somewhere in the previous generation, your parents' generation, there was a family separation. Perhaps siblings who were adopted separately, or children who were displaced during conflicts and lost track of each other." She pointed to the genetic markers on the screen. "Based on the specific chromosomal patterns, I would estimate that you're Father and Kemi's mother were likely half-siblings, sharing one parent but raised in completely different circumstances, possibly even different countries. Rashid buried his face in his hands. My father never spoke much about his family history. He came from a nomadic Bedouin tribe that was scattered during the regional conflicts of the 1940s. Many families were separated. Children were displaced. He looked up suddenly. But how could Kemi's family be connected to that? Colonial displacement, Dr. Ogundipe explained. The 1940s and 1950s saw massive population movements across Africa and the Middle East. Families were torn apart, children were taken to different regions, records were lost or destroyed. It's entirely possible that a child from your father's family ended up in Nigeria, started a new life, and became part of what eventually became Kemi's family line. Zara had been listening in stunned silence, but now she spoke up. Mama Aduni always said our family had come from far away, but she never explained what that meant. She said the old stories were too painful to tell. This would explain some of the physical resemblances, Dr. Ogundipe continued. Not just between you and your father, but some of the facial structure patterns that are consistent with mixed Middle Eastern and West African heritage going back several generations. Rashid stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the Lagos skyline. So you're telling me that when I fell in love with Kemi, when we planned to build a life together, we were unknowingly... He couldn't finish the sentence. You were third cousins, at most, Dr. Ogundipe said gently. Genetically, that's actually within acceptable parameters for most cultures, and certainly not dangerous from a medical standpoint. But I understand this is emotionally difficult to process. Difficult? Rashid laughed bitterly. I've spent 23 years mourning a woman I loved, searching for a daughter I thought was lost, only to discover that our entire relationship was built on a connection we never knew existed. Zara watched her father. She was still adjusting to thinking of him that way, struggle with this revelation. But something else was bothering her, something that went beyond the genetic connection. Dr. Ogundipe, she said slowly, if our families were connected generations ago, how did my mother end up in Nigeria while his family was in the Middle East? And why would someone want to attack them when they were together? The doctor looked puzzled. I'm not sure I understand the connection you're making. Zara pulled out the photograph of her parents that Mama Aduni had given her. My grandmother said my mother came to her bleeding and terrified the night I was born. She said there had been an attack, that armed men had come for both my parents. But if they were just two young people in love, why would anyone target them? Rashid turned from the window, his expression suddenly alert. What exactly did your grandmother tell you about that night? She said my mother escaped during the attack but was badly injured. She lived just long enough to give birth to me and make my grandmother promise to keep me hidden. She was afraid the attackers might come for me too. A chill ran down Rashid's spine as fragments of memories he had tried to suppress came flooding back. The robbery, he said slowly. It wasn't random. What do you mean? Dr. Ogundipe asked. Rashid's face had gone deadly serious. The night Kemi disappeared, we were staying in a safe house because we had been receiving threats. Someone had discovered our plans to elope, but we thought it was just family disapproval. We never considered... He paused, his business mind making connections he had been too grief-stricken to see 23 years ago. Considered what? Zara prompted. My family's business wasn't always conducted through legitimate channels, Rashid admitted reluctantly. In the 1990s, there were rival factions trying to control trade routes between the Middle East and West Africa. If someone had discovered that I was planning to marry into a family that was unknowingly connected to our own bloodline, Dr. Ogundipe leaned forward. You think the attack was orchestrated by business rivals? Or family members who knew about the connection and wanted to prevent it for their own reasons? Rashid said, his voice growing harder. In traditional societies, bloodline purity and inheritance rights are taken very seriously. If someone in my extended family knew that Kemi's lineage could stake a claim to our family's assets, Zara felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. So, my mother didn't just escape by chance. Someone deliberately tried to kill both of you to prevent what? To prevent exactly what's happening right now, Rashid said grimly. A reunion that could challenge the existing power structure within my family's business empire. The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air. Zara wasn't just a lost daughter returning to claim her birthright. She was potentially the key to unlocking a decades-old conspiracy that had already cost her mother's life. Dr. Ogundipe set down the genetic reports with a heavy sigh. I'm a scientist, not a detective or a security expert, but if what you're suggesting is true, then Miss Okafor might still be in danger. As if summoned by her words, Rashid's phone began ringing. The caller ID showed his head of security in Dubai. With a sense of foreboding, he answered. Sir, the voice on the other end was tense with urgency. We've intercepted some concerning communications. There are people asking questions about the girl in Lagos, and they're not journalists. You need to know that your location has been compromised. Rashid looked at Zara, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. The DNA test had given them answers, but it had also painted a target on both their backs. The same forces that had tried to destroy his relationship with Kemi 23 years ago were still active, and now they knew that their efforts had failed. How long do we have? Rashid asked his security chief. Unknown, sir, but I'd recommend moving to a secure location immediately. As Rashid ended the call, Zara stood up from her chair, her young face set with a determination that reminded him powerfully of her mother. So what do we do now? Rashid looked at his daughter. This brave, young woman who had saved his life and unknowingly stepped into a web of family secrets and ancient conflicts. The genetic test results had left him speechless, but now he found his voice again. Now, he said firmly, we finish what your mother and I started 23 years ago. We claim your rightful place in this family, and we make sure that whoever tried to destroy us back then never gets another chance. But even as he spoke those words, Rashid knew that the most dangerous revelations were still to come. The black SUVs moved through Lagos traffic with practiced efficiency, their tinted windows concealing the urgency of their mission. Inside the lead vehicle, Zara sat rigidly beside Rashid, watching the familiar streets of her childhood disappear behind bulletproof glass. Everything had changed in a matter of hours. From learning she was the daughter of a billionaire to discovering she was the target of a decades-old conspiracy. We need to get to Mama Aduni, Zara said for the third time, her voice tight with worry. If they know about me, they might go after her. Rashid spoke quietly into his secure phone, coordinating with his security team. My people are already en route to Makoko, he assured her. Your grandmother will be protected, but protection felt like a foreign concept in a world that had just revealed itself to be far more dangerous than Zara had ever imagined. Through the bulletproof windows, Lagos looked different now. Every face in the crowd could be a threat. Every vehicle could be following them. Hassan Al-Qadir, Rashid's head of security, turned from the front passenger seat. He was a compact man in his 50s with graying hair and the alert eyes of someone who had spent decades anticipating danger. Sir, we've identified at least 3 separate surveillance teams that have been tracking your movements since yesterday. They're professional, well-funded, and they've been asking very specific questions about the girl. What kind of questions? Zara asked. About your mother's family lineage, about any documentation of your birth, about who else might know your true identity, Hassan replied grimly. These aren't random criminals or opportunists. Someone with resources and connections has been planning this. The convoy turned into the private entrance of the Eco Hotel, one of Lagos's most secure luxury establishments. But instead of stopping at the main building, they continued to a separate wing that served as a safe house for high-profile visitors who required discretion and protection. As they entered the heavily guarded facility, Zara felt overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her circumstances. Less than a week ago, she had been cleaning boat hulls for survival money. Now, she was being protected by armed guards in a luxury safe house because powerful people wanted her dead. "I need to understand something," she said as they settled into the secure conference room. "You said the attack 23 years ago wasn't random. Who exactly would have wanted to stop you and my mother from being together?" Rashid poured himself a glass of water with hands that weren't quite steady. "To understand that, you need to know about my family's business structure. The Al Mahmoud Empire isn't just a company. It's a consortium of tribal interests, family alliances, and territorial claims that go back generations." He activated a large screen on the wall, displaying a complex family tree and business organizational chart. "When my father established our modern operations in the 1970s, he unified several smaller family groups under our banner. But that unification came with strict rules about inheritance and bloodline succession." Zara studied the intricate diagram. "And my mother's family line threatened those rules somehow." "More than threatened, it potentially invalidated them," Rashid explained. "If the genetic connection Dr. Ogundipe discovered is accurate, and if Kemi's mother was indeed related to my father's family, then her descendants would have legitimate claims to assets that other family members believed were exclusively theirs." Hassan pulled up additional documents on his tablet. "We've been investigating since yesterday, and we've found some disturbing information. In 1999, there were at least 6 separate incidents targeting young people from various family lines who might have posed succession challenges." "Your parents weren't the only ones. You mean other people were killed to protect inheritance rights?" Zara asked, horrified. "Disappeared, discredited, or worse," Hassan confirmed. "It was systematic and it was effective. Until now." The implications made Zara's stomach turn. "So my existence proves that their plan failed, and if I claim my place in the family, you could potentially unravel 23 years of carefully constructed power arrangements," Rashid finished. "Which means they'll try to eliminate you just like they tried to eliminate your mother." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. One of the security guards entered, followed by an elderly Nigerian woman in traditional dress. But this wasn't Mama Aduni. This was someone Zara had never seen before. "Miss Okafor," the woman said in accented English. "My name is Amara Okafor. I am your mother's elder sister." Zara stared at the woman in shock. "I have an aunt, but Mama Aduni never mentioned—" "Your grandmother was protecting you by keeping our existence secret," Amara explained. "But recent events have made that impossible. There are things about your mother's death that you need to know, things that could keep you alive." Rashid gestured for Amara to sit. "What kind of things?" Amara opened a worn leather satchel and pulled out a collection of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a small journal. "Kemi didn't die the night you were born," she said, looking directly at Zara. "She lived for 3 more days." The revelation hit Zara like a physical blow. "What?" "But Mama Aduni said—" "Your grandmother lied to protect you," Amara continued, gently. "Kemi was badly injured in the attack, but she survived long enough to document everything she knew about the conspiracy against your family. She wrote it all down, names, dates, bank account numbers, even recorded conversations. She placed the journal on the table. Your mother was an investigative journalist before she met your father. She had been researching irregularities in Middle Eastern business operations in West Africa. when she encountered Rashid. She suspected even then that powerful families were manipulating territorial claims and inheritance rights. Rashid leaned forward, his face pale. "She never told me she was investigating my family's business." "Because she fell in love with you before she realized the connections," Amara explained. "But when the threat started, she began putting pieces together. She realized that your relationship wasn't coincidental. Someone had been watching both your families for years, waiting to see if the genetic connection would ever surface." Hassan examined the documents with professional interest. "These are detailed financial records, offshore account numbers, even communication intercepts. If this information is accurate, it could bring down half the power structure in 3 different countries," Amara finished, "which is why they've been searching for it ever since Kemi died. They know she documented their activities, but they never found where she hid the evidence." Zara picked up her mother's journal with trembling hands. The pages were filled with neat handwriting in multiple languages, English, Arabic, and what appeared to be coded symbols. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" "Because 23 years ago, your mother made me promise that if you ever met your father, I would give you the tools to protect yourself and to seek justice for what they did to your family." Amara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She died knowing that someday the truth would come out. Rashid was studying the financial documents with growing amazement and horror. "Some of these accounts, I recognize them. They're family trust funds that were supposedly established for charitable purposes, but according to these records, they were being used to fund elimination operations against potential heirs." Hassan said grimly. "This isn't just about inheritance anymore. This is evidence of systematic murder for financial gain." A secure phone buzzed and Hassan answered it quickly. His expression grew increasingly tense as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at Rashid with urgent concern. "Sir, we have a problem. 3 separate teams have converged on Lagos in the past 6 hours. They're not just here to monitor the situation anymore, they're here to resolve it permanently." "How long do we have?" Rashid asked. "Unknown, but our intelligence suggests they plan to move within the next 24 hours. They want to eliminate both Miss Okafor and anyone who might have access to her mother's documentation." Zara felt the weight of her mother's journal in her hands. Inside these pages was evidence that could bring justice for decades of murder and corruption, but possessing that evidence had also made her the target of people who had already proven they would kill to protect their secrets. "I won't run," she said quietly, surprising everyone in the room. "My mother died trying to expose these people. I won't let her sacrifice be meaningless." Rashid looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. "Zara, you don't understand how dangerous this is." "No," she said firmly. "You don't understand how dangerous I can be when I'm fighting for my family." She held up the journal. "This isn't just evidence, it's a weapon, and I intend to use it." Hassan and Amara exchanged glances, recognizing the same fierce determination that had driven Kemi Okafor to risk everything for the truth. "Then we need to move fast," Hassan said. "If we're going to expose this conspiracy before they eliminate the evidence and the witnesses, we need to act in the next few hours." Rashid stood up, his expression resolving into the focused determination that had built a business empire. "Then we finish what Kemi started. We bring them down, and we make sure Zara can claim her rightful place without fear." But as they began planning their counterattack, none of them realized that the enemy had been listening to every word they had spoken, and that the final confrontation was already closer than they imagined. The digital forensics team worked through the night in the secure facility, their screens glowing with decades of financial data as they traced the money trails documented in Kemi's journal. Dr. Elena Vasquez, A cybersecurity expert Rashid had flown in from London, looked up from her multiple monitors with grim satisfaction. "Your mother was brilliant," she told Zara, who sat beside her watching the data analysis unfold. "She didn't just document transactions. She created a complete map of how money flowed between legitimate businesses and elimination operations across 3 continents. The evidence was staggering. Kemi's investigation had uncovered a network that went far beyond simple inheritance disputes. For over 4 decades, a consortium of families had been systematically eliminating potential claimants to various business empires, oil rights, and territorial holdings across the Middle East and Africa. "Look at this," Dr. Vasquez highlighted, a series of transactions on her screen. Every time someone with a legitimate bloodline claim surfaced, payments were made to the same network of operatives. Assassinations disguised as accidents, disappearances blamed on regional conflicts, even entire families eliminated in staged terrorist attacks. Rashid studied the data with growing horror and rage. "How many people are we talking about?" "Over 200 documented cases spanning 4 decades, Dr. Vasquez replied. "And these are just the ones your mother was able to track down. The actual number could be much higher." Amara sat in the corner, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the scope of the conspiracy that had killed her sister. Kemi suspected it was big, but not this big. She thought she was investigating corruption, not genocide. Hassan burst into the room, his face urgent. "We have a problem. The surveillance teams have been replaced by action units. Our perimeter guards report at least 12 armed operatives taking positions around the building." "How did they find us so quickly?" Rashid demanded. Hassan held up a small electronic device. "They've been tracking us electronically. We found this in your jacket, planted sometime during the hospital visit. They've been listening to everything." The realization sent a chill through the room. Their enemies hadn't just been watching. They had been planning their response to every revelation, every piece of evidence, every strategic decision. Which means they know about the journal, about Dr. Vasquez's analysis, about everything, Zara said, her mind racing ahead to the implications. "Not everything," Dr. Vasquez said with a slight smile. "I've been uploading copies of all this data to secure servers in 12 different countries as we've been working. Even if they eliminate all of us tonight, the evidence will still exist." Rashid looked at his daughter with new understanding. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? You knew they'd try to silence us." "I hoped they would," Zara admitted, "because desperate people make mistakes, and we need them to make mistakes if we're going to expose them." Hassan's radio crackled with urgent reports from the security perimeter. "Sir, they're not just positioning for an assault. They're setting up for a siege. They want us to know they're there." "Why would they telegraph their intentions?" Amara asked. Zara stood up, her expression resolute. "Because they want to negotiate. They think they can offer us something valuable enough that we'll agree to destroy the evidence and disappear quietly." As if summoned by her words, the secure phone rang. Hassan answered it on speaker. "Mr. Al-Mahmoud," a cultured voice spoke, in English with a slight Arabic accent. "My name is Mahmoud al-Rashid. I believe we have much to discuss." Rashid's face went deadly pale. "Mahmoud? But you're supposed to be dead?" "Yes, that was a convenient fiction that allowed me to operate more freely. I've been watching your family's affairs for many years, nephew." The word nephew hung in the air like a revelation. Zara looked at her father questioningly. "Mahmoud is my father's younger brother," Rashid explained quietly. "He disappeared during a business dispute 30 years ago. We assumed he had been killed by rivals. I survived, and I thrived," Mahmoud's voice continued from the phone, And I've spent 3 decades building the organization that has protected our family's interests from illegitimate claimants and pretenders. Protected? Zara spoke directly into the phone. You mean murdered? Pragmatic solutions for complex problems, young lady. You should understand. Your mother certainly did when we offered her the opportunity to walk away quietly. The room fell silent. Amara gasped, and Rashid's hands clenched into fists. Kemi refused your offer, Rashid asked. Your beloved Kemi was given multiple opportunities to cease her investigation and relocate with generous financial compensation. She chose to continue digging, so we provided her with a more permanent solution to her curiosity. Zara felt a cold rage building inside her chest. You murdered my mother. I solved a problem that would have destabilized 4 major business operations and threatened the livelihoods of thousands of employees. Sometimes leadership requires difficult decisions. Dr. Vasquez was frantically typing at her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked to trace the call and gather additional intelligence. What do you want? Rashid asked. Simple. You return the journal and all copies of any evidence derived from it. Miss Okafor signs a legal document renouncing any claim to family assets or inheritance rights. In exchange, you both live comfortable lives in whatever location you choose with generous financial support. And if we refuse, Zara asked, then you join your mother in a more permanent silence. The choice is yours, but I'm afraid my patience has limits. You have 1 hour to decide. The line went dead. The room erupted in urgent discussion as Hassan coordinated with his security teams and Dr. Vasquez continued her digital investigation. I've got something, Dr. Vasquez announced suddenly. I was able to trace that call through 3 proxy servers. He's not just coordinating this operation. He's physically here in Lagos, less than 2 kilometers away. Hassan studied the location data. That's the old industrial district. Plenty of warehouses and abandoned buildings for a command center. Can we get to him? Rashid asked. Not through the siege perimeter they've established around us, Hassan replied, but there might be another way. Zara was studying her mother's journal, flipping through pages filled with codes and symbols. My mother anticipated this, she said slowly. Look at this entry from 3 days before she died. She showed them a page covered in what appeared to be random numbers and letters, but with a pattern that suggested deliberate encoding. She knew they would try to negotiate before eliminating us. She prepared for this exact scenario. Zara's voice grew excited as she decoded her mother's notes. She didn't just document their crimes, she set a trap. Dr. Vasquez leaned over to examine the codes. These look like bank authorization codes and digital transfer protocols. Your mother wasn't just gathering evidence, she was positioning to transfer their own assets away from them. A financial kill switch, Hassan said with admiration. If they eliminated her, the evidence would trigger automatic transfers that would bankrupt their operations. Amara smiled through her tears. My sister always was the smartest person in any room. Zara continued decoding her mother's final preparations. But the trap was never triggered because she died before she could implement it. The authorization codes expired. The digital protocols were never activated. Until now, Dr. Vasquez said, understanding the implications. With the right access and the proper authorization, we could destroy them financially while simultaneously exposing their crimes globally, Rashid finished. Hassan's radio crackled again with reports from the perimeter guards. Sir, movement from multiple directions. They're not waiting for the full hour. Zara closed the journal and stood up with determination. And then we don't wait either. Dr. Vasquez, how long do you need to implement my mother's financial protocols? 20 minutes if I have uninterrupted access to the internet and no security interference. Hassan, how long can your team hold the in perimeter? Against 12 operatives, maybe 15 minutes if we're lucky. Zara looked at her father, then at her aunt, then at the team of professionals who had risked their lives to help her seek justice for her mother. Then we have 5 minutes to spare, she said with a confidence that surprised everyone in the room. Dr. Vasquez, start the transfers. Hassan, hold the line. Amara, she turned to her aunt with a serious expression. I need you to do something. That might be dangerous. Anything for Kemi's daughter, Amara replied without hesitation. I need you to call Uncle Mahmoud back and tell him we accept his terms. Arrange a meeting for the exchange. Rashid stared at his daughter in alarm. Zara, what are you planning? I'm planning to finish what my mother started, she said firmly. But to do that, I need to get close enough to Mahmoud to look him in the eye when his entire world collapses around him. The sounds of approaching vehicles and coordinating operatives grew louder outside the building. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Zara was about to discover whether her mother's legacy would be enough to bring down a conspiracy that had operated in shadows for decades. But as Dr. Vasquez's fingers flew across the keyboard and Hassan's security teams prepared for battle, none of them realized that Mahmoud al-Rashid had one final card to play, one that would test Zara's resolve in ways she had never imagined. The abandoned warehouse in Lagos's industrial district reeked of rust and decay, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Zara walked through the entrance with deliberate calm, her mother's journal clutched in her left hand and a small device Dr. Vasquez had given her hidden in her right pocket. Behind her, the sounds of the city seemed muted, as if the world were holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Mahmoud al-Rashid stood in the center of the warehouse, flanked by 6 armed men in tactical gear. At 68, he retained the commanding presence that had built and maintained a murder-for-hire network spanning 4 decades. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his expensive suit immaculate despite the grimy surroundings. When he smiled at Zara's approach, his eyes remained cold as winter stones. Miss Okafor, he said with mock courtesy, you're remarkably composed for someone so young, facing such momentous decisions. I'm my mother's daughter, Zara replied simply. She taught me that fear is just another form of information. Mahmoud's smile faltered slightly. Yes, your mother was quite resilient. Even at the end, she maintained that irritating certainty that truth would somehow prevail over necessity. It will, Zara said, stopping 10 feet away from him. It already has. Bold words from someone whose life hangs by the thread of my patience. Mahmoud gestured to his armed escorts. Where is my nephew? I expected Rashid to accompany you to this historic moment. He's ensuring that our agreement is honored. Dr. Vasquez is preparing to delete all digital copies of the evidence, and Hassan is withdrawing his security teams as we speak. What Zara didn't mention was that 20 minutes. Earlier, Dr. Vasquez had successfully activated every financial protocol that Kemi had prepared 23 years ago. At this very moment, 57 different bank accounts across 12 countries were automatically transferring their contents to a network of humanitarian organizations and war crimes tribunals. The conspiracy's entire financial foundation was crumbling in real time, triggered by authorization codes that Kemi had embedded in her journal. Mahmoud pulled out a tablet and showed Zara a live video feed from the safe house. I can see the facility from multiple angles, my dear. Your people are still in position, and their weapons are still trained outward. Did you really think I would trust the word of idealistic children? No, Zara admitted. I thought you would. Do exactly what you're doing right now, focusing so intently on controlling the immediate situation that you'd miss the larger picture. Mahmoud's expression sharpened. What larger picture? Zara pulled the small device from her pocket and held it up so he could see it clearly. This is a satellite uplink transmitter. For the past 30 minutes, every word of our conversation has been broadcast live to news networks, international law enforcement agencies, and human rights organizations across 6 continents. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sounds of Lagos traffic. Mahmoud's men shifted nervously, their weapons still trained on Zara, but their confidence clearly shaken. "You're bluffing," Mahmoud said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Am I?" Zara activated the device's screen, showing real-time social media feeds where Mahmoud al-Rashid was already trending globally. News outlets were scrambling to verify the shocking audio of a man confessing to ordering murders and coordinating a decades-long elimination campaign. "The beauty of the digital age," Zara continued conversationally, "is that information travels faster than bullets. By now, your associates in Dubai, London, and New York are watching their bank accounts drain, and their names appear on international wanted lists." Mahmoud's tablet buzzed with incoming calls and messages. His face went pale as he scrolled through. Urgent communications from his network, asset freezes, bank seizures, arrest warrants, everything he had built was disappearing in real time. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Those accounts were protected, encrypted, untraceable." "My mother was an investigative journalist who specialized in financial crimes," Zara explained. "She spent 18 months infiltrating your network before you even knew she existed. Every protection you thought you had, she had already mapped and prepared to circumvent." One of Mahmoud's men stepped forward, his weapon raised. "Sir, we should eliminate the witness and extract immediately." "No," Mahmoud said sharply, his strategic mind still functioning despite the disaster unfolding around him. "Killing her now would only confirm everything. We need to find another solution." Zara laughed, a sound that echoed strangely in the empty warehouse. "There is no other solution. My mother didn't just document your crimes. She created a dead man's switch that would trigger if anything happened to her family. The evidence has been distributed to sources that are beyond your reach or influence." "What do you want?" Mahmoud asked, and for the first time, Zara heard desperation in his voice. "I want you to answer one question truthfully," she said. "Why? You already had more wealth and power than most people could imagine. Why did you feel the need to murder innocent people to protect something you already possessed?" Mahmoud was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You really don't understand, do you? This was never about money or even power. This was about family." "Family." Zara's voice carried genuine confusion. "Your grandmother, my father's first wife, was supposed to inherit control of our tribal assets when he died, but she disappeared during the conflicts of the 1940s, and everyone assumed she was dead. My father remarried, had children with his second wife, and established the business empire that became our family's foundation." Zara felt the ground shifting beneath her understanding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your great-grandmother wasn't just connected to our family. She was the rightful heir to everything we built. When she vanished, the inheritance passed to my father's second family. But if her bloodline ever surfaced," he gestured helplessly, "everything we achieved would legally belong to her descendants." "You've been murdering people to steal an inheritance that was never rightfully yours," Zara said. The full scope of the conspiracy finally becoming clear. "I've been protecting my children and grandchildren from losing everything because of an accident of birth that happened before they were born," Mahmoud replied defensively. "Your mother's investigation threatened to expose not just the killings, but the original deception that established our family's claim to power." Zara shook her head in disgust. So you killed her to protect a lie? I killed her to protect my family's future, Mahmoud said firmly, just as you would do anything to protect yours. No, Zara said with absolute certainty. I would never build my family's future on the graves of innocent people. Her tablet buzzed with an incoming message. Mahmoud glanced at it, and his face went completely white. What is that? A message from my father, Zara said, reading the screen. The international arrest warrants have been issued. Interpol teams are already en route to Lagos. You have approximately 15 minutes before this warehouse is surrounded. Mahmoud's men were becoming increasingly agitated, their weapons shifting between Zara and the warehouse entrances as they anticipated law enforcement's arrival. Sir, one of them said urgently, we need to move now if we're going to extract. But Mahmoud seemed frozen, staring at Zara with an expression that mixed rage, defeat, and something that might have been admiration. You orchestrated all of this, didn't you? The rescue, the DNA test, even allowing us to track you to the safe house, it was all designed to bring me here. My mother orchestrated it, Zara corrected. I just followed her instructions. She knew that eventually, someone like you would make the mistake of thinking they could negotiate with her family instead of simply eliminating us immediately. She planned for this specific scenario? She planned for every possible scenario, Zara said proudly, including the one where her daughter would have to look her mother's killer in the eye and watch justice finally be served. The sound of approaching helicopters began to echo through the warehouse. Mahmoud's men looked to their leader for orders, but he seemed transfixed by the realization that he had been outmaneuvered by a dead woman's strategy and a 17-year-old girl's courage. You know, he said, almost conversationally, I genuinely believed that eliminating idealistic people like your mother would make the world more pragmatic, more efficient. Instead, Zara replied, you just ensured that their children would grow up understanding exactly how dangerous people like you can be. The helicopters were getting closer, and the sound of approaching vehicles could be heard from multiple directions. Mahmoud's 15-minute window was rapidly closing. Last chance, sir, one of his men urged. We can still get you out. Mahmoud looked at Zara one final time, then at the device in her hand that had broadcast his confession to the world, then at the tablet showing the collapse of everything he had spent his life building. No, he said quietly. I think it's time to face the consequences of my choices. As the first law enforcement vehicles screeched to a halt outside the warehouse, Zara allowed herself a small smile. Her mother's 23-year plan for justice was finally complete, and the man who had stolen so many lives was about to learn that some debts can never be escaped, only postponed. But even in her moment of triumph, Zara knew that the most difficult part of her journey was still ahead, learning how to build a life worthy of her mother's sacrifice and her father's love. 6 months after the arrest of Mahmoud al-Rashid and the dismantling of his criminal network, Zara stood on the terrace of the newly established Kemi Okafor Foundation headquarters in Lagos, watching the sun set over the sprawling city that had shaped her childhood. The building, a gleaming symbol of hope in the heart of Nigeria's commercial capital, had been constructed with funds recovered from the conspiracy's seized assets. The transformation in her life had been overwhelming, but Zara had insisted on maintaining certain constants. Every morning she still visited Makoko, though now she arrived in a modest sedan rather than on foot. Mama Aduni had been moved to a private medical facility where she received the best care available, but she often chose to spend her afternoons back in the floating slums, sharing stories with children and teaching them the same lessons about dignity and humanity that she had instilled in Zara. The reporters are here for your interview, said Amina Hassan, Zara's newly appointed chief of staff. Not to be confused with her father's security chief, this Amina was a brilliant young lawyer who had volunteered to help manage the foundation after being inspired by Zara's story. Zara nodded, adjusting the simple blue dress she had chosen for the occasion. 6 months of media attention had taught her many things, but perhaps the most important was that authenticity resonated more powerfully than any designer outfit or carefully crafted image. The interview was being conducted by Sarah Chen, an international correspondent whose investigative journalism had helped expose several other criminal networks connected to Mahmoud's organization. The ripple effects of Kemi's evidence had reached far beyond the al-Rashid conspiracy, ultimately leading to the arrest of over 300 individuals across 4 continents. Miss Okafor, Sarah began as the cameras rolled. 6 months ago, you were cleaning boat hulls in Makoko for survival wages. Today, you're managing a foundation with assets worth over $2 billion and operations in 15 countries. How do you process such a dramatic change? Zara considered the question carefully. I think about my mother every day, she said, finally. She died believing that truth and justice were worth any sacrifice. My job now is to make sure her sacrifice leads to something meaningful for people who are still fighting the same battles she fought. The Kemi Okafor Foundation focuses specifically on supporting young people who have been displaced by conflicts or economic manipulation. Was this always your vision? My mother's investigation revealed that the conspiracy didn't just target people with inheritance claims. They deliberately destabilized entire regions to create conflicts that would displace populations and make it easier to acquire land and resources cheaply. Zara's voice grew stronger as she spoke about her work. We're not just providing aid, we're addressing the root causes that create displacement in the first place. The Foundation's work had already begun to show results. Educational programs in 12 African countries were helping young people develop skills that made them less vulnerable to exploitation. Legal aid clinics were assisting families in recovering property that had been stolen through fraudulent means. Most importantly, a new international database was tracking inheritance claims and genetic lineages to prevent future conspiracies from operating in the shadows. What about your relationship with your father? Sarah asked. That's another dramatic adjustment, going from not knowing he existed to suddenly being the heir to a business empire. Zara smiled, and for the first time in the interview, she looked genuinely happy. My father has been incredible. He could have easily tried to control my decisions or pressure me to join his business operations. Instead, he supported every choice I've made, even when those choices cost him financially. Rashid had indeed proven to be remarkably supportive. When Zara decided to use most of her inherited wealth to establish the foundation rather than joining the family business, he had not only approved but had contributed additional resources from his own companies. Their relationship had deepened beyond the dramatic circumstances of their reunion into genuine affection and mutual respect. He's teaching me about the business world, but he's also learning from me about social justice, Zara continued. Our family companies have implemented new policies to ensure we're not inadvertently supporting the kind of systems that allowed the conspiracy to operate for so long. There have been reports that you've received threats from associates of the dismantled network. Are you concerned about your safety? Zara's expression grew serious. Of course I'm concerned. Evil rarely disappears completely when you expose it. It usually just finds new ways to operate. But I refuse to live in fear. My mother didn't have the luxury of protection, and she still chose to fight. I have resources and security that she never had, so I have even less excuse to back down. The security around Zara was indeed extensive, though she insisted it remain as unobtrusive as possible. Hassan al-Qadir had transitioned from protecting Rashid to coordinating Zara's safety, assembling a team of professionals who specialized in protecting human rights workers in dangerous environments. What would you say to young people who feel powerless against systemic corruption and injustice? I would tell them that my mother was just one person with a notebook and a camera, and she managed to create a plan that brought down a conspiracy that had operated for 40 years. Zara leaned forward slightly, her intensity evident. You don't need wealth or connections to fight injustice. You need courage, patience, and the willingness to document everything carefully. Truth has its own power, but only if people are brave enough to pursue it and preserve it. After the interview concluded, Zara walked through the Foundation's offices, checking on the various projects that were already making a difference. In one room, a team of lawyers was working on inheritance, disputes similar to the one that had torn her family apart. In another, educators were developing curricula to help young people recognize and resist exploitation. Dr. Elena Vasquez had joined the Foundation as its technology director, creating secure systems for protecting witnesses and evidence in cases involving powerful criminal networks. Her digital expertise had already helped expose 2 smaller conspiracies that had been operating in Eastern Europe and South America. As evening approached, Zara made her way to the small office she had set aside as a private space. The walls were decorated with photos of her mother, letters from families the Foundation had helped, and a framed copy of the last page from Kemi's journal. Her mother's final words had become the Foundation's unofficial motto: "Truth delayed is not truth denied. It is truth made more powerful by the patience of those who preserve it." A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Rashid entered, carrying 2 cups of Nigerian coffee and wearing the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who had spent the day in intense business meetings. "How did the interview go?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Well, I think. Sarah asked good questions, and I tried to give honest answers." Zara accepted the coffee gratefully. "How were your meetings with the Dubai investors?" "Productive. 3 more companies have agreed to implement the new transparency protocols, and we're making progress on the supply chain monitoring systems." Rashid had thrown himself into reforming his business operations with the same intensity he had once applied to building them. "I think your mother would be proud of what we're accomplishing." "I know she would," Zara said softly. "Sometimes I dream about her, and in those dreams she's not sad anymore. She's excited about all the possibilities." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, father and daughter united by their shared commitment to honoring Kemi's memory through meaningful action. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Rashid said eventually. "The investigators have recovered most of Mahmoud's assets, and there are still properties and investments that legally belong to our family. You could easily become one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. Are you sure you want to continue directing those resources toward the Foundation rather than securing your own future?" Zara smiled, thinking of Mama Aduni's words from so many months ago. "We may have nothing, but we still have our humanity." "Papa," she said, using the Arabic word for father that still felt new on her tongue, "I was raised by a woman who taught me that wealth means having enough to share with others. I have more than enough. The question isn't whether I can secure my future, it's whether I can help secure a future for people who don't have the advantages I've been given." Rashid nodded, his eyes bright with pride. "Your mother chose well. When she chose to keep you in Nigeria, you understand justice in a way that someone raised in luxury never could." As they prepared to leave the office, Zara paused at the window overlooking Lagos. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of Makoko twinkled on the water, marking the floating community where her journey had begun. Tomorrow, she would return, there to check on the new education center the foundation was building. She would probably get her clothes dusty and her hands dirty, just as she had when she was cleaning boat hulls for survival money. But now, when she returned home each evening, it would be to continue the work her mother had started, ensuring that truth, justice, and human dignity would always be more powerful than greed, corruption, and the selfish ambitions of those who believed themselves above the law. The girl who had saved a stranger from a burning car had become a woman dedicated to saving her community from the systems that created suffering. And in the process, she had discovered that the most profound DNA test results aren't found in laboratories. They're found in the choices we make about how to use whatever power we possess to protect those who have none. Zara Okafor Al-Mahmoud had finally found her true family, everyone who needed someone to fight for justice on their behalf. And that family, she knew, would always be worth saving. 2 years had passed since the world first learned the name Zara Okafor Al-Mahmoud, and the ripple effects of her story continued to spread far beyond anything she could have imagined. On a crisp December morning in Geneva, she stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council, preparing to deliver a speech that would reshape international law regarding inheritance fraud and systematic displacement. The Assembly Hall was packed with delegates from 193 countries, representatives from major international corporations, and activists who had traveled from every continent to witness this historic moment. In the front row sat Rashid, now serving as a special advisor to the UN on business ethics reform, and beside him Mama Aduni, who, despite her advanced age, had insisted on making the journey to see her granddaughter address the world. "Honorable delegates," Zara began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "I stand before you today not as the heir to a business fortune, but as the daughter of a woman whose courage created a blueprint for exposing corruption that operates across borders and generations." The proposed legislation she was advocating for had emerged from the evidence contained in Kemi's journal. The International Inheritance Transparency Act would require mandatory disclosure of beneficial ownership in family trusts, create a global database for tracking inheritance disputes, and establish rapid response protocols for protecting witnesses in cases involving systematic elimination of heirs. My mother, Kemi Okafor, was killed because she discovered that wealthy families were literally murdering their way to stolen inheritances, Zara continued. But her death was not in vain, because her documentation has led to the recovery of over $8 billion in stolen assets and the prosecution of 347 individuals involved in these criminal networks. In the 2 years since Mahmoud's arrest, the scope of the conspiracy had proven even larger than originally suspected. Investigations had revealed similar operations in South America, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. The Kemi Okafor Foundation had become the coordinating center for victims seeking justice, with offices now operating in 23 countries. Dr. Elena Vasquez had revolutionized the foundation's technological capabilities, creating secure platforms that allowed witnesses to safely document evidence and connect with legal resources without exposing themselves to retaliation. Her innovations had already been adopted by human rights organizations worldwide, but legislation alone is not enough, Zara told the Assembly. We must also address the economic conditions that make communities vulnerable to exploitation in the first place. The Foundation's most ambitious project was already underway in 12 African countries, a comprehensive program that combined education, economic development, and legal protection to create exploitation-resistant communities. Young people were being trained not just in traditional skills, but in recognizing and reporting the early warning signs of systematic land grabbing, inheritance fraud, and other forms of economic manipulation. Hassan al-Qadir had evolved from security coordinator to regional director for Africa, establishing networks of local protectors who could identify and respond to threats before they escalated to violence. His teams had already prevented 6 attempted eliminations of inheritance claimants in the past year. The DNA test that revealed my father's identity was shocking, Zara said. But the real revelation was discovering that my parents' love story was actually the culmination of a criminal conspiracy spanning generations. Today, we have the opportunity to ensure that no other family suffers as mine did. In the audience, several delegates were visibly moved by her words. The Canadian representative had tears in her eyes, while the Nigerian delegate sat with obvious pride at his young countrywoman's eloquence and impact. I want to share with you the letter my mother wrote on the night she died, Zara said, pulling out a document that had been discovered in the deepest sections of her journal. She wrote, "To my daughter, who I pray will grow up in a world where truth is stronger than greed. Remember that every act of courage, no matter how small, creates ripples that can eventually become waves of change. You are my ripple. Become their wave." The chamber fell completely silent as the weight of those words settled over the assembly. "Today, I ask you to help me become that wave," Zara concluded. "Not for my family's sake, but for all the families whose stories will never be told if we do not act." The standing ovation that followed lasted for 7 minutes, but more importantly, the vote that came afterward was unanimous. The International Inheritance Transparency Act would become binding international law within 18 months. After the session, Zara found herself surrounded by delegates wanting to discuss implementation details and offer their country's support, but she made her way through the crowd to where Mama Aduni sat, her weathered hands folded peacefully in her lap. "Are you proud of her?" Rashid asked the elderly woman quietly. "I am proud of both of them," Mama Aduni replied, looking at Zara and then at him. "Kemi would be amazed to see how her daughter has turned her pain into purpose and how her father has learned to use his wealth for justice rather than just profit." Later that evening, at a private dinner hosted by the Swiss government, Zara received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Sarah Ogundipe, the geneticist who had first confirmed her parentage, approached with a small, wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this personally," Dr. Ogundipe said. "It's the original DNA analysis report from 2 years ago. I thought you might want to have it as part of your mother's archive." Zara unwrapped the package carefully, revealing the scientific document that had changed everything. As she read through the genetic markers and probability calculations, she reflected on how clinical language had revealed such profound human truths. "Dr. Ogundipe," she said thoughtfully, "do you think my mother somehow knew that the DNA test would reveal more than just paternity?" The doctor smiled. "Your mother was a brilliant investigator. I think she suspected that the genetic connection between your parents wasn't coincidental. The way she documented everything suggests she was preparing for revelations that went far beyond simple family reunion. She prepared me for a life I never could have imagined," Zara said softly. "No," Dr. Ogundipe corrected gently. "She prepared you to be yourself in any circumstances. That's the greatest gift any parent can give." As the evening wound down, Zara stood on the balcony of her hotel room, looking out over Lake Geneva. Tomorrow, she would fly back to Lagos to continue the Foundation's work. Next month, she would travel to South Sudan to open a new legal aid center. In 6 months, she would testify at Mahmoud's final appeals hearing, ensuring that justice remained served. But tonight, She simply wanted to remember the girl who had pulled a stranger from a burning car, without knowing that single act of courage would expose a conspiracy, reunite a family, and ultimately help protect thousands of other families from the same fate that had befallen her mother. Her phone buzzed with a message from Amina Hassan, back in Lagos. The boat hull cleaning children in Makoko want to know when you're coming home. They have stories to share with you. Zara smiled, typing back, "Tell them I'll be there soon, and remind them that their stories matter too." Because in the end, that was the true power of DNA, not the genetic markers that connected people through biology, but the choices that connected them through shared humanity. Zara had learned that family wasn't just about blood relationships. It was about the commitment to protect each other and fight for justice together. The poor African girl who had saved an Arab executive's life had become a woman dedicated to saving anyone who needed someone to believe their story mattered. And in a world where powerful people still tried to silence inconvenient truths, that commitment was perhaps the most important inheritance of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.